afternoon, everyone. My name's Tania Bassett. I'm National Official for NAPO, which is a trade union and professional association for probation and family court staff. And on cue, my next door neighbours have just started drilling, so I'm going to apologise in advance for any background noise, and I will try and keep on mute as often as possible. Welcome to the Fringe meeting. I'm just going to go through some housekeeping first. Please be aware that the Fringe meeting will be recorded. So if you have any objections to being recorded, then please use the comments button, but you can also just turn off your camera as well if you don't want to appear in the recording. I'd like to ask everyone to be mindful of language. The TUCG shares the commitment to organising activities at which everyone can participate in, inclusively, respectfully, and a safe environment. We have zero tolerance for any type of harassment, including sexual harassment, aggressive, offensive, intimidatory, disrespectful, or unacceptable behaviour or comments. So they will not be tolerated. Please do turn off your camera if you need to leave the meeting at any point to save any embarrassing shots. And I ask people to remain on mute when they're not talking to minimise background noise. We're going to hear from each speaker and then we'll have a Q&A session. So please use the chat function to submit any questions that you might have. Okay, that's the housekeeping done. So the topic for today's discussion is about how the new ways of working during COVID and beyond impact on women in particular and pose new challenges for trade union organising. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our guest speakers today. We have Mary Bousted, the Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union, Sarah Woolley, General Secretary of the Bakers, Food and Allied Workers Union, and Jo Grady, General Secretary of the UCU, University and College Union. So a warm welcome to our speakers. I'm going to obviously take a slight abuse of the position of chair and just talk a little bit about the impact it's had on NAPO members, particularly working from home. So for our members, of which 75% are women, the impact of working from home has been quite significant. Many of our members have reported the struggle of juggling home life, childcare and work, which has been reported across the board for women working at home. But given the nature of the work in probation, for example, trying to supervise clients who have committed sexual offences, for example, whilst being in the same room as their young children, has severely impacted on mental health of our workers and stress levels because they've been unable to put in that barrier between professional and personal life. And systemic issues across probation and family courts, such as workloads, have been exacerbated through the pandemic, adding further stress with home working and people working much longer hours than they potentially would have done if they'd been in the office. Despite these very serious issues, though, Her Majesty's Inspectorate for Probation has reported that risk management across probation has significantly improved with lockdown. Remote working has enabled members to attend more multi-agency meetings, for example. And of course, members with disabilities have reported that home working is a positive change. So today's discussion is aimed at looking at what those struggles of home working and remote working and COVID restrictions have been. But I think it's also important that we look at what improvements or benefits our members have seen that could positively shape the future of work going forward. So I'd first of all like to hand over to Mary Bousted from the NEU to talk a bit about the impact on her members.
Thank you, Tania, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here with Kevin Courtney. I'm Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union. I just want to talk a little bit about the pressures on our members, on our women members, not for too long, but then I want to talk about how the union has organised in during COVID when the normal democratic structures have not been available to us, because I think it's important that we think about new ways of working and what that might mean for the trade union movement. So the NEU's membership is 76% women. Teachers do the most unpaid overtime of any profession, with average working weeks going above 50 hours. For teachers, it's usually about 52 hours a week. But in COVID, that working time has increased by 6.5 hours because schools haven't been closed. Schools have been open for the children of vulnerable children and key worker children. And during the last lockdown, there was much higher numbers in school, particularly primary school. So teachers were teaching in school and then doing remote learning. And remote learning just takes forever to do. Doing an online lesson takes much longer than doing a lesson in person. It takes much longer to plan it because you don't have the pupils in the classroom, you're not responding to their what they're doing, you have to write everything down. It's really like painting by numbers, where more experienced teachers sort of paint by impression because they've got such a wealth of experience, which tells them what they do need to explain and what they do need to write down. If you don't have that ability to verbally explain, then it takes much longer to do the work. So they found their working hours have really increased. And then, of course, many of them have childcare as well. So they've been working either in school or working from home. And they are key workers. But for some of them, there has been the joint thing of doing the work, but also looking after their children. So it has been a really stressful time. And yet, during COVID, since last March, the NU's membership has grown by over 35,000 members. And the new joiners have been 81% female, so that's 19% male. 13% of new joiners are Black, and 24% are aged under 25. And 35% of joiners were between 24 and 34. So we've seen a huge increase in membership, 35,000 increase in members. And we've also seen more of those members, more female members becoming reps. So we've increased our rep base by nearly 5,000 during COVID. And the overall density of our reps in schools and colleges increased by 12%. So we've now got 40% of our schools and colleges have a rep in them. And the number of our reps has increased by 30%. So 57% of our primary members are in a school with a rep, but 78% of our secondary members are in a school with a rep. That's a huge increase in the rep density. But here's the interesting thing. 72% of the new reps are women. So they nearly match the percentage of women in the union. 38% of them are under 35, and 25%, a quarter of them, have less than 3 years service. 14% of reps are part-time, and 65, we've had a disproportionate growth in primary reps, 65% are primary reps, and it's usually more difficult to recruit a rep for a primary school because they're smaller workplaces, and it can be more difficult to put your head over the parapet. 5% of the new reps are LGBT+, and 3% of the new reps are disabled. So there has been an absolutely, a 12% increase in rep density is an absolutely massive increase in reps. And the fact that 78% of secondary schools, but now over half of primary schools, are schools where there is a rep in place. That means that the union is visible. It is present in schools. And the fact that so many of those reps are young women is really important. Now, how have we achieved that? Because we weren't achieving that rise when we had normal meetings. And I think there's something really important to hold on to here. What used to happen was that women teachers would be working all day in school. They would be coming home, doing hours of marking and lesson preparation. And then the expectation was they'd go to a branch meeting at 7:30, often in a pub. And women, that's not an attractive prospect. It's not an attractive prospect for for men as well, but it's not an attractive prospect for women. So what has changed, I think, is that the NEU has really used new technology in order to communicate with members. And we've done that through Zoom meetings. So on the 3rd of January, we had a Zoom meeting attended by 400,000 people. That was the day before going back to school, when Gavin Williamson was forcing primary schools to open in the middle of a pandemic with a new variant and with case levels rising exponentially. We had 400,000 people on that call, 100,000 on the call for the whole time, the whole hour, but 300,000 in and out. And at the end of that meeting, we said, we think the situation in schools is unsafe. You shouldn't be going back to school. We think you should sign Section 44 letters. Here's a model letter. You have to make an individual decision to sign it, but you can submit it with a group of you, although all of you have to individually sign it, otherwise it's an illegal industrial action. And we know from the feedback and from the figures we got from schools that the next day, quarter of primary teachers signed Section 44 letters. Now, that is just amazing, that level of action on behalf of a membership which is predominantly women and predominantly has been the most reluctant to take action. So we have used new technology. What we do now, we've used Zooms throughout the pandemic. They usually Zooms for our reps and our branches. We did a reps and branch Zoom last week, 8,000 reps and branch officers on the Zoom call. But then what we're doing is putting the Zoom calls on social media, on YouTube, so people can watch them in their own time. And that is doubling the what we're doing. We've really been very, very interested in increasing our social media footprint. So our Facebook page has gone from 50,000 to 150,000 followers. And the NEU now has the biggest Facebook page and the biggest social media footprint of any union. When we did our conference, we set up our own conference software, which we've now shared for free with the rest of the trade union movement. And so that was the first voting platform, which we called NEU Democracy. And if you want to use that and you want to know how we ran an online conference, which we'll be doing again at Easter, then do let us know that. And then for our members who are you know, they've received no training in doing remote learning, we've set up a huge amount of support and guidance for members, for example, around a remote education hub, which allows them to access the best practice in teaching and learning remotely, and also a guild where they can go online and they can share their experience of teaching and learning with one another. And hundreds of thousands of members and non-members have read that content. What's also been really interesting is the growth in confidence in women members, particularly women reps. So we've really championed the use of WhatsApp. You can't meet personally because of COVID, but you can set up a WhatsApp meeting, and that is happening thousands of times each week, where reps are communicating with each other within the local authority, but also within their school. You know, what are the issues? Have you looked at the new NEU checklist for going back safely? Have you looked at the guidance around mask wearing? Have you looked at the union's advice around remote learning? And to stimulate those conversations in school. So what we have seen from our women reps is a huge increase in confidence to have conversations with school leaders, confidence that they have the ability to represent their members, confidence that the union is there to support them. And every time we do a Zoom call and we have new material to give members, we release that during the Zoom call. Here's a new checklist, out it goes to them. And in the last branch and reps call, we did something new, which we've never done before, which is all the members we've got phone numbers for, we texted them the new documents. So rather than just getting it by email, they also got it by text, which is really, really powerful for them. So obviously, when we go back to life as more normal, obviously in-person meetings will be really important. They are a way, but we are not going to give up the use of new platforms like Zoom, they were new to me when I did them because I'm a technophobe, but we're not going to give up the new platforms which we've used to have meetings with members, to tell them of union policy, to give them advice and to get them involved in the democratic processes. I don't think our reps will stop using WhatsApp, either in their schools and colleges or across the local authority. And we will continue with a blended model of trade unionism, which involves, of course, face-to-face meetings. Those are important. Branch meetings, executive meetings, and branch secretaries meetings. We will continue those face-to-face meetings, but we recognise that those can be highly exclusionary. And what we're going to be doing is carrying on with the new ways of working, because they have energised the union and they have increased our rep base by 12%, which transforms the platform of the union in schools and colleges.
Thank you very much, Mary. There's some really eye-watering statistics in that, in a good way, obviously, about the increase of membership, the increase of engagement. And I think the fact that so many people have been able to get to grips with that remote learning and also then transfer that to attend branch meetings remotely And certainly NAPO saw something similar last year when we held our AGM on a virtual platform, that we had an increased attendance for those that normally wouldn't be able to pack up and go to a seaside town for 3 days, being able to access something for the first time. So that's really positive news. Thank you. I'm going to hand over now to Sarah Woolley, General Secretary of the Bakers Union.
Thanks, Tania, and thank you for the opportunity to join this fantastic panel today. It's great to be here, and although we can't be together in a room as we would normally be, the fact that we can still get together collectively and have meetings like this, as Mary mentioned, is brilliant. And it shows that we've certainly got options going forward to remove some of the barriers in our movement that we as a union face, as well as others, around participation, which will hopefully increase engagement with the many women in our membership and the wider movement as a whole, who certainly fell out of the loop in pre-COVID times because they couldn't attend a branch meeting or haven't stood to become reps as they have difficulty attending training courses hundreds of miles away, and for whom conference is certainly something that somebody else in the branch normally does, as Tania said, going away to the seaside for a week. I'm going to touch on some of the issues that our members have faced, some of the challenges that we've got going forward in workplaces, and some of the opportunities that I see that we've got as a movement. The last 12 months have been horrendous, thanks in the main to the continued mismanagement by the government, leaving employers to exploit the situation in many cases, and we know that women as a result have been impacted disproportionately and will continue to be, however long this lasts. We've seen a worrying continued rise in domestic violence cases and deaths. The pressure of working from home as well as homeschooling has pretty much fallen on the shoulders of women. And for those that have continued to work in workplaces, NHS, teaching staff, carers, essential retailers, postal workers, and our own members in the food industry, to name a few, have done so under extreme pressure. They've had to adapt to massive changes in working practices, fighting for PPE in lots of cases, adhering to social distancing measures and shift changes, or remote working for parts of the week, dealing with short staff situations due to the pandemic, and certainly our members, in our members' cases, as well as a few other unions, a sharp increase in demand for the products that they make about a year ago that hasn't really gone back down since. And for those that have been furloughed, having the worry of surviving on 80% of your wages, because that has been the reality for the majority of people on furlough, on top of the children being at home and eating more as a result, because I know we have, it has meant 12 months now of continued stress and worry, which will be taking its toll, even if people don't feel that it is. And what the pandemic has highlighted, is that for years, when employers have said things like, working from home isn't possible, we need you here on site, or we can't allow you to start and finish your shift half an hour early or late, or we can't let you only work 4 days a week instead of 5, all under this guise of due to business needs, it was unnecessary. Because when it suited them over the last 12 months, they've been open to doing all that and more. And we know that they'll claim that it was to keep people safe, and in many cases it will have been, on the back of the hard work of our health and safety reps, mind, but it has showed that it can be done without it being a catastrophe. And what we need to do now as trade unions is to ensure that going forwards, we don't allow employers to say, yeah, but that was due to the pandemic, when it suits them, and not to allow them to force things in like home working permanently, purely to save them money, regardless of the impact it may have on our members and their mental health. But also looking inwards at ourselves as unions, our structures, our rules, and see how we can remove barriers to women participating and stepping up in branch, regional and national positions going forwards, because we've managed to do it ourselves over the last 12 months. I think the panel today shows that our movement is slowly changing, moving away from the white, male, pale, stale position it has been for so long seen as. And I'm proud to be sat here with such strong female leaders. We have a big responsibility though, because it's not good enough just having a female general secretary in post. We need the women in our membership to be empowered and in leadership positions throughout the membership and our movement as well. Mary and the NEU have done some fantastic work over the last 12 months, and I know Jo's done a lot of work around sexual harassment too. And that, along with period poverty, pensions, menopause, domestic violence, all need to be conversations that we are having openly and honestly with our members, giving branches the tools to negotiate around them, paid time off, for example, if someone needs to escape a domestic violence situation, free sanitary products in workplaces, a clear reporting system for sexual harassment with accountability, and ensuring that when risk assessments are completed, the symptoms of menopause are taken into account. Because having these as serious issues that are at the front of our discussions with members and their employers will show that we are serious about the issues women face. And it isn't that it hasn't been done before, that it's just not been a priority. A couple of weeks ago, our national president, Ian, mentioned that he'd visited a site a number of years ago where the team who were doing the final touches to a cake being produced were all mature women, yet the area that they were working in felt like an oven. When he asked if there'd been any consideration to their time of life, because he wasn't sure how to approach it without being offensive, they hadn't. And actually 2 women joined the union that day because they'd actually been asked how it was impacting them. Because what we tend to find is those discussions are uncomfortable for our male colleagues, and as a result, just tend to be pushed down the agenda. And that's not good enough. It's infuriating and puts women off raising things in the first place, but even joining the union. And we need to make sure that talking about the menopause isn't shied away from, just as talking about green issues isn't. That we are the people that our members can turn to if they are experiencing domestic violence, and that we have our houses in order when it comes to sexual harassment. We're definitely at a crossroads thanks to the pandemic. We don't have to go back to how things were pre-COVID, and why should we? And thanks to these brilliant women alongside me virtually, we, as well as others that we have in the movement, we have a massive opportunity to change our movement. And I, for one, am really excited about that. And you guys all on the call today are part of that change. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen overnight, but it can be done together by empowering our sisters throughout the union movement and making sure that they have a voice that is heard. We also need to work on removing the imposter syndrome that so many of us have, because we deserve to be here and shouldn't be made to feel like we have to apologise for it by anyone. We need to continue to utilise the digital methods, WhatsApp, Zoom, Teams, however that may be, that have broken down those barriers and don't go back to how we were beforehand. That have allowed so many more women to be involved in our movement for the last 12 months. And I'll finish by saying, I know I'm in a privileged position sitting here as a General Secretary. I've worked hard to get here. I'm the first female General Secretary the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union has ever had, the first female national officer, in fact. But I know I'm not going to be the last. And if I can get here as a teenage mum from Wakefield who didn't go to university, didn't really know what she wanted to be when she grew up, an ex-Greggs employee, anyone can. And if I can do anything to help or support any of you on the call get to where you want to be, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and really inspiring. Really interesting points as well, that actually the pandemic has given us some really positive opportunities to change the way we work that will particularly enable women to be much more proactive and engaged in their union. And I think that's really important. And I think the idea of having a mission statement maybe that we can eradicate imposter syndrome would be absolutely brilliant. And I like to think that the one positive thing to come out of the last 4 years of the Trump presidency is that in itself should eradicate imposter syndrome for all women, because if he can manage to get to that position of power, then I can guarantee every person in this room right now has absolutely immense potential to really make a huge difference, either in their workplace or in other workplaces or across the board. So thank you very much, Sarah. I'm now going to hand over to Jo Grady from UCU.
Thank you. Part of the Wakefield massive of female general secretaries as well. Just thought I'd point that out. I think Mary and Sarah have done a really good job of sort of covering various topics that I was going to touch upon. So I'm probably just going to maybe take some of the themes that both of them have covered, but maybe go in a slightly different direction with it. Because I think one of the things that's been really interesting about the opportunities that COVID has presented to us have been how we can organise and how we can kind of challenge those more sort of traditional, which sometimes are quite heteronormative ways of organising. As Mary said, they're either kind of focused around particular working regimes or pub culture or whatever. So I'm going to say a little bit about that, but first I wanted to say something about actually something UCU is engaged in pre-COVID, but that we've actually established during COVID and will probably conclude before we come out of whatever this COVID period is. So one of the things that I included in the manifesto that I produced when I ran for General Secretary back in around about this time in 2019, was to establish member-led task groups. I was firmly of the opinion that our members have more than enough knowledge to solve the problems in our sectors, but that unions sometimes, for no kind of real fault of anybody, but don't capture those experiences and don't capture that knowledge in the way in which we could. I said that I wanted the first task group that we established to be around sexual violence. And I wanted it to, I didn't put any kind of stipulations on what kind of outputs the group might produce, but that the outputs of the production of that group should be on eradicating sexual violence in our sectors, and that could then hopefully be used as a kind of a campaigning blueprint for other unions, whether it's the bakers, other teaching unions, you know, any union at all, really. And we established that group in the summer. I forget the exact month now, but we had for 12 spaces over 140 applications to sit on this task group. It was huge. We have mostly women members, there's a non-binary member, there's members from every sort of ethnic group that our union covers, members with disabilities. A lot of the people who applied to be on it made it really clear that they, again, for no real fault of anybody, but had felt quite excluded from other ways of participating in the union. Sometimes that actually was participating in a picket line. Wasn't that they did not take part in industrial action, but whether they'd got a disability or other things just meant that they couldn't take part in those traditional areas of resistance that our union had. Some of them were very precariously employed UCU members, which meant that they didn't really fancy running for election on some of our national committees either. I'm labouring this because what we essentially provided was a space where people could take either their life experience as an activist on this particular issue, sometimes their academic experience as a UCU member who sort of teaches or researches on this, or just something else entirely, like their life experience of living through being a survivor, to say, I want to take part in this task group. It has been an enormously fulfilling thing that we've launched. They're due to conclude probably in the next few months. A survey, which is one of the outputs that they produced, is about to go to UCU members soon. And I am really excited about the extent to which we will have a completely member-led group participating in a national conversation about what we as a union are going to do. They've turned the lens in on the union about what actually prevents participation because of sexual harassment or violence within our union, as well as on the sectors, as well as on a kind of a broader cultural and societal lens. And I think this is really important because what it's shown is, I mean, this wasn't necessarily intended to get women involved, because we all know we can all be victims or survivors of sexual violence, but it has actually provided us with a lot of really rich feedback from members who are desperate to get involved, who are really proud of being UCU members, and who really have something to give, but just didn't really feel there was an outlet for them. So there'll be more task groups, and I think it's a real eye-opener for us about how we maybe try and reach out to groups that for whatever reason, those more sort of heteronormative kind of patriarchal structures that unions just have because we've inherited them have acted as barriers. So I'm really proud of that, and that's something that we're leading on. It would be remiss of me, before I move on from sexual violence, to not point out that on a General Secretary level, to connect to what Sarah was saying, myself, Mary and Sarah are all kind of trying to lead the way at General Council TUC level on this issue. We've drawn together a General Secretary Sexual Violence Charter, which really positions us as leaders, women leaders of our unions, saying what are we going to do from a workplace perspective in our unions to make sure that our staff are safe. So this isn't just a member-facing set of activities, it's also looking inwards, and there's going to be more to come on that also, because I saw in the call we've also got a really kick-ass female head of legal at UCU who's kind of helping me pull that together internally. So there's so much more to come on this, and I agree with Sarah, I'm really kind of proud and grateful actually to be sharing this time and space with other women in this movement who see this as a real priority for us. Very quickly in terms of organising, not going to repeat the points that Sarah and Mary have made really articulately about creating new spaces, you know, showing it can be done. I think that's really, really good. What I would say is one of our most under recruited areas, i.e. prison membership, which UCU does represent prison educators. We have increased our membership in one particular of prisons, the Novus area of privatisation of prisons, by 57% in the 10-month period last year of the lockdown up until January. That is a huge organising effort to increase the membership by 57% during lockdown. Many educators, women, this was around health and safety and COVID. We're just about to start running an industrial action ballot in that privatised prison provider to keep people safe throughout the rest of the pandemic. And a lot of this, the calls that we've been doing late night, lots of women reps, lots of organising, and again, showing that there's other ways, and particularly for, you know, prison members who, if you've ever worked in a prison, the sort of ways of working means you can't necessarily all go and hang out together during breaks. It's not so easy to sort of organise in the workplace. So actually, it's been quite an interesting way for us to find ways to organise online, which I'm sure will serve us really, really well out of the pandemic. But I think has also really, again, has just demonstrated there's new ways of organising, new ways of campaigning. And actually, I think in terms of looking a little bit more broadly just towards our HE and FE members, I think the next thing that we're going to have to be looking at as we emerge out of the pandemic and the health and safety crisis as is kind of behind us is, how do we challenge these heteronormative reward regimes? So in HE in particular, we have seen women, because they've been doing the bulk of caring, not doing their research, not doing outputs which we know they will be rewarded and measured and potentially disciplined on. Again, workload, clawing that back for women, making sure that there isn't a burden for the emotional labour that women have just simply had to do, whether we think that's, you know, disreputable in and of itself. So the sort of the key challenges is how we carry forward with the things that were important to us before the pandemic, such as sexual violence, getting new ways of organising, how we continue the great organising effort we've managed to do from our perspective, particularly around prisons, and how, as we move into this next period of consolidation, we make sure that people aren't punished after the pandemic for things like lost workload, lost outputs, when men haven't faced that penalty. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Jo. And I think that's a really interesting factor, and certainly one that hadn't occurred to me, about the long-term consequences of women not being able to engage fully in the workplace because they've had to pick up the majority of domestic issues and caring issues, etc. And obviously, you thankfully raised a subject that's close to my own heart, the issues of health and safety in prisons. Prisons have certainly been hugely forgotten during this pandemic. And whilst actually it's been relatively steady, and they've managed to keep the cases quite low of what we feared might happen, we are actually now starting to see quite a significant rise in COVID cases amongst prisoners and staff. And unfortunately, we're seeing an increase in the death rate that we hadn't seen previously during the pandemic. So it's certainly something that requires cross-union work. And I know that UCU engage in the Health and Safety Prisons trade union group that was set up to try and tackle some of those issues. So thank you very much. I'd like to say a big thank you to all three speakers. I'm checking the chat, but as it stands at the moment, I'm not sure if we've got any questions. So I'll just give people a few moments if they want to submit any questions.
Tania, I'm gonna have to go. I just to let you know, I had my COVID jab yesterday, and I'm just gonna go and lie down in a darkened room because I've had a reaction to it, which is not something that you want to hear about. So it's been really nice to be with you. Thank you very much. Great to be with Tania, Sarah and Jo, and great to see you all. I can see our ex-president Amanda there, looking beautiful as ever, chatting away. Well, not chatting away, but she WhatsApped me, so she knows I've got COVID as well. Not, I've not got COVID, I've got a reaction to a COVID jab. So
thank you very much, Mary. Go and put your feet up and a much deserved cup of tea, I think. But thank you very much for your contributions. Okay, I don't actually see any questions in the chat. So on that note, we can all give a warm thank you to our speakers and for their contributions. Thank you very much. I'll raise my hands that way. Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for attending. Do enjoy the rest of the TUC Women's Conference, and please do try and get active in your local union if you're not already, because there are so many more opportunities that this pandemic has given women to engage across the board in their union and make it much more flexible. And I think it's really important we hold on to those positives and we don't revert back, as previously stated, to that almost patriarchal way of running the union down the pub at 7 o'clock at night when everyone else is trying to look after the kids. So we've got a lot of work to do, but I feel really positive from today's meeting that we've got the right women in the right place to start making those changes. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks for chairing, Tania.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Tania. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.